My name is Celeste Donovan, and I am 34 years old. Exactly 3 years ago, my parents voluntarily liquidated $600,000, their entire life savings, and blindly handed it over to my older sister to fund her wellness startup. They gathered us around the dining room table that night, not to consult my professional opinion as a senior forensic auditor for a Fortune 500 firm, but to demand I take notes and learn how to be successful from her. When I attempted to highlight the glaring, catastrophic red flags buried in her financial projections, my mother aggressively shut me down. She told me I was just boiling with jealousy and that my tiny mind simply could not comprehend high-level business. Well, skip forward 3 years to our massive Thanksgiving dinner. While 30 extended family members and friends watched in absolute horror, federal FBI agents marched right through our front door holding a pair of steel handcuffs. And the very first sentence my sister shrieked as they read her Miranda rights? This was all Dad's idea. Before I break down exactly what unfolded in the chaotic aftermath of that raid, I would deeply appreciate it if you could take a quick second to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. But please, only do so if this narrative genuinely strikes a chord with you. Also, drop a comment below letting me know where in the world you are streaming this from and what the clock says in your time zone. The roots of this disaster trace back to a harsh reality I was forced to swallow at a very young age. Inside the walls of the Donovan household, certain daughters were destined to be shining stars, while others were simply birthed to sit in the audience and clap. Growing up, the dividing line was perfectly clear. On one side, you had Victoria. She was physically stunning, effortlessly charismatic, and possessed this gravitational pull that forced every room she entered to orbit entirely around her. On the other side, there was me. I was the silent shadow. While Victoria was busy putting on theatrical, impromptu living room concerts for our adoring aunts and uncles, I was tucked away in a quiet corner devouring paperback novels. While I was quietly bringing home perfect report cards, every adult in the house was infinitely more concerned with asking Victoria how her latest community theater audition went. Back then, I did not hold any fiery resentment over the dynamic. I genuinely just believed that was the natural ecosystem of a family unit. Some individuals were destined for the spotlight, and others were tasked with buying the tickets. The very first time the agonizing reality of my position truly crystallized for me was on the evening of my high school graduation. I had successfully earned the title of valedictorian. I had sacrificed 4 grueling years of my adolescence for that specific accolade, burning the midnight oil, skipping teenage parties, and pushing my brain to its absolute limits. As the principal called my name to approach the podium and deliver my speech, I scanned the massive auditorium crowd. My parents' designated chairs were completely empty. They finally strolled in 20 minutes behind schedule, casually slipping into a back row right as the crowd was applauding my conclusion. My mother's bulletproof excuse? Victoria had secured a last-minute callback for a local television commercial. We could not possibly abandon her in a waiting room all by herself, she justified. Keep in mind, Victoria was a 22-year-old adult who owned her own vehicle. You completely understand, don't you, sweetie? My mom cooed later that evening, adjusting the tassel on my graduation cap as if that physical gesture somehow erased her absence. You're just so remarkably independent. You never really require a cheering section. But Victoria is built differently. Her soul is just so incredibly sensitive. I nodded my head. I forced a polite smile. I actively brainwashed myself into believing that being labeled independent was a badge of honor. It took me a decade and a half to finally realize that independent was simply the convenient vocabulary my parents utilized to describe the child they refused to prioritize. Victoria was not possessing a more sensitive soul. She was simply deemed more worthy of being seen. And in the Donovan family hierarchy, being perceived was the only currency that mattered. But as an 18-year-old, I lacked the emotional vocabulary to articulate that trauma. I just carried a heavy, hollow void in my ribcage, clutching a valedictorian medallion that not a single relative ever bothered to ask to see. Fast forward 12 years into the future. I had meticulously constructed a life that filled me with genuine pride. I had earned the title of senior auditor at Sterling and Walsh, which was widely considered one of the most elite financial auditing firms in downtown Chicago. I was pulling in a robust six-figure salary. I collaborated on massive federal investigations with the SEC, actively dismantling complex corporate fraud rings that routinely made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. My industry peers deeply respected my intellect, and the firm's partners entrusted me with their most highly classified, sensitive audits. But absolutely none of that professional prestige carried any weight at our traditional Sunday family dinners. "So, Celeste," my dad muttered, aggressively slicing into his roasted steak. "Are you still doing that little number thing downtown?" "I am a forensic auditor, Dad. I meticulously analyze corporate financial disclosures, hunt down hidden fraud, and collaborate directly with federal investigators." Right, he casually waved his silverware through the air, completely dismissing my sentence. Lots of tedious typing. From across the mahogany table, Victoria let out a condescending giggle. At the age of 37, she was currently drifting between employment yet again. She preferred the term consulting, which essentially translated to being totally jobless, but possessing a highly inflated vocabulary. Yet, if you observed the awe in my parents' eyes when they looked at her, you would assume she was on the shortlist for a Nobel Prize. Victoria is currently evaluating some absolutely spectacular opportunities, my mother proudly announced to the room, topping off my sister's Pinot Grigio. She possesses such incredible vision. Very few people on Earth possess the capacity to see the grand picture quite like she does. Celeste is highly skilled at looking at the tiny picture, my dad chimed in. Focusing on all those boring little details is a valuable trait, too. Every company requires someone to handle the invisible, behind-the-scenes grunt work. I slowly placed my fork down onto my porcelain plate. I literally provided expert testimony in a massive federal fraud trial last month. The CEO I investigated is currently staring down a 15-year prison sentence. The table went completely dead. Then, my mother broke the silence. "Well, that is very nice, honey. But at the end of the day, you are still just grinding away to make someone else rich, are not you?" Victoria is destined to construct her own empire from the ground up. She was born with the true entrepreneurial spirit. I locked eyes with my older sister. She offered me a highly calculated smirk, an expression that hovered perfectly between mock sympathy and absolute triumph. She had always been completely fluent in that specific brand of silent cruelty. The exact professional skill set they were currently mocking, my unique ability to detect when the math was fundamentally broken, would eventually bring their entire world crashing down. But the family was not quite ready to have that specific conversation yet. The infamous phone call occurred on a random Tuesday evening, roughly 6 months after that disastrous steak dinner. "We are hosting an urgent family summit tomorrow night," my mom dictated over the line. "Victoria has an incredibly monumental announcement to share with us. Be at the house precisely by 7 o'clock. And please dress nicely." I bit my tongue to keep from asking why formal attire was a requirement for a casual Wednesday night dinner in their living room. I had long ago learned that asking logical questions only dragged out these painful interactions. When I arrived the following evening, my childhood dining room had been totally converted into a corporate boardroom. Victoria had installed a digital projector and a sleek laptop. The glowing screen proudly displayed her brand new corporate logo, Vitality Wellness Solutions, rendered in aggressive, metallic silver font. Sit down, my mother practically shoved me toward a dining chair. "This is just so unbelievably thrilling." My dad was already positioned at the head of the table, his knee literally bouncing up and down with uncontrollable excitement. I had never, ever seen him project that level of enthusiastic engagement toward a single milestone in my entire life. Victoria immediately launched into a highly choreographed presentation. She pitched a revolutionary, AI-driven wellness platform tailored specifically for small business infrastructures. She claimed it was going to completely disrupt the entire health technology sector. She relentlessly deployed every single generic buzzword hiding in the Silicon Valley dictionary. I sat there quietly. I watched the colorful bar graphs slide across the screen, and the pit of my stomach instantly plummeted into the floorboards. Our highly conservative projected revenue for year one sits at a staggering $2.5 million, Victoria declared, puffing out her chest. $2.5 million. With zero established clientele, absolutely no working prototype, and zero technical co-founders on the roster. And I am overwhelmingly elated to announce tonight, her voice suddenly adopted a trembling, theatrical wave of emotion, that Mom and Dad have generously agreed to step in as my primary angel investors. My mother aggressively reached out and squeezed my dad's hand. We are officially injecting $600,000 into the company. The entire dining room violently tilted on its axis. That is, I stammered, completely losing my professional composure. That is the entirety of your liquid retirement portfolio. It is a strategic investment into our bloodline. My dad quickly corrected me, his tone defensive. Victoria is going to elevate this entire family into a different tax bracket. Victoria's smile was blinding. I have already fielded massive interest from several elite angel syndicates. This initial seed money is just laying the groundwork. I stared blankly at the projected slides. The mathematical equations she was presenting defied every single law of financial logic I had ever been trained to analyze. And sitting in that chair, I made a highly conscious choice that would permanently dictate the subsequent 3 years of my existence. I opened my mouth. Victoria, I started, keeping my tone as clinical as possible. What exact metrics are you utilizing to formulate these specific revenue projections? Her posture instantly went rigid. Extensive market research and current industry standard growth models. Which specific industry? I countered. Because legitimate software platforms historically require a minimum runway of 3 to 5 years before they even approach. Celeste. My mother's voice snapped like a dry twig. We are not doing this tonight. I am merely asking basic, fundamental questions. Dad, you are casually dropping $600,000 into this entity. Do you not possess an urge to review her client acquisition pipeline? Or analyze her projected cash burn rate? Who exactly are these unnamed angel investors she mentioned? Victoria's plastic smile remained perfectly glued to her face. Her eyes turned into frozen daggers. You simply would not comprehend the mechanics of this, Celeste. This operates on fast-paced startup culture. It is an entirely different universe than your boring little corporate auditing cubicle. My boring little cubicle involves actively dissecting these exact types of fraudulent. That is absolutely enough. My dad violently pushed his chair back and stood up. Celeste, tonight is exclusively your sister's moment of triumph. We did not invite you over here to ruthlessly interrogate her. I am not performing an interrogation. I am executing the most basic level of financial due diligence that literally any sane investor would demand. Well, we are not just random, cynical investors. We are a family unit. My mother aggressively wrapped her arm around Victoria's shoulder like a protective shield. We inherently believe in her vision. Why are you so utterly incapable of doing the same? That specific question hung heavy in the dining room air, feeling exactly like a loaded gun pointed at my chest. I slowly looked around the mahogany table. I absorbed my father's highly aggressive, defensive stance. I absorbed my mother's desperate, clinging grip on my older sister. And I absorbed the vicious, deeply satisfied smirk plastered across Victoria's lips. I inherently believe in verified facts, I stated quietly, my voice devoid of any emotion. And the numbers currently projected on that screen do not mathematically add up. You are just consumed by jealousy. My mom delivered the sentence like a terminal medical diagnosis. You have spent your entire life radiating jealousy toward Victoria. She possesses gifts that you entirely lack. Incredible vision. Natural charisma. The sheer, unadulterated courage to dream on a massive scale. And rather than stepping up to support her journey, you are actively trying to sabotage her out of pure spite. Victoria aggressively dabbed at her completely dry eyes with a linen napkin. I genuinely just wanted us to pop some champagne and celebrate this milestone together as a unified family. My dad stepped over and wrapped a comforting arm around his distressed golden child. We are absolutely celebrating you, sweetheart. Celeste, you are going to apologize to your sister right this second. I slowly stood up from my dining chair, grabbing my purse. I genuinely, truly hope that I am dead wrong about this, I said, staring directly into my father's eyes. But I absolutely was not wrong. And judging by the microscopic, fleeting shadow of terror that briefly flashed across my father's pupils, I knew that deep down, he suspected it too. When I returned to my apartment that night, sleep was a complete impossibility. I sat hunched over my kitchen island until 3 o'clock in the morning, furiously drafting an incredibly dense, comprehensive email. I fully recognized that my words would likely fall on completely deaf ears, but my moral compass demanded that I try one final time. I systematically dismantled her entire presentation. I brutally outlined the wildly fabricated revenue models. I pointed out the highly suspicious, vague allusions to anonymous angel syndicates. I highlighted the glaring absence of any practical operational budget and the terrifying reality that my sister possessed zero coding background and had not named a single software engineer on her payroll. I provided hyperlinks to statistical studies regarding the catastrophic failure rates of modern tech startups. I even built and attached a realistic spreadsheet demonstrating what responsible, legitimate seed round capital allocation should actually look like. I concluded the long email with a desperate plea. Please, I am begging you, just hire an objective, independent auditor to review her business plan before you execute the wire transfer. I will personally cover the cost of the audit out of my own pocket. Just grant me 14 days to verify her technological claims. That is literally all I am asking of you. I hit send, copying both of my parents' email addresses. Exactly 14 days evaporated. Absolute radio silence. I finally broke down and dialed my mother's cell phone. Did you guys bother to open my email? Celeste, that message was incredibly long and exhaustive. Did you actually read a single paragraph of it? A heavy, put-upon sigh echoed through the speaker. Honey, your father, and I deeply appreciate your paranoid concerns, but we have officially finalized our choice. The capital was transferred to her corporate account yesterday afternoon. My chest violently constricted, stealing my oxygen. Yesterday, Victoria urgently required the liquid cash to capitalize on a highly time-sensitive window. She secured a massive meeting with a potential whale client. You supposedly understand how the corporate world operates, Celeste. Agility is everything. No, I knew exactly how predatory scams operated. And this was no longer a naive business venture. This was a catastrophic financial hemorrhage playing out in excruciating slow motion. Mom, please, just give me your word that you are maintaining meticulous legal documentation. Force her to put every single promise in writing. If the accounting starts looking blurry, I am going to sleep now, Celeste. Have a good night. The line abruptly clicked dead. I sat alone in the darkness of my living room, the silent phone still pressed tightly against my ear. And then, I performed an action I had never previously felt compelled to do against my own bloodline. I opened my desktop and generated a brand new digital folder titled Vitality. I dragged a PDF copy of my 3 a.m. warning email into the file. I did not save it so I could arrogantly gloat "I told you so" in the future. I did not save it to construct a federal indictment. I saved it simply because I desperately needed tangible proof for my own sanity. I needed a permanent record proving that I had actively tried to stop the bleeding and that I was not clinically insane for seeing the smoke before the fire. Exactly 12 months later, I honestly started to gaslight myself into believing I might have miscalculated. It was my mother's birthday celebration. Victoria came screeching up the driveway in a blindingly pristine, snow-white BMW. Oversized designer sunglasses were effortlessly perched atop her blowout, and she looked like she had just wandered off a Milan runway. "It is my brand new company vehicle," she loudly broadcasted to the flock of swooning relatives gathering on the front lawn, gently running her manicured hand across the polished hood. I mean, technically it is a corporate lease agreement, but Vitality covers the entire monthly premium. Aunt Margaret practically tore a hamstring sprinting across the grass to shower her with praise. "Victoria, darling, you are just crushing the industry. Your parents must be absolutely bursting with joy." "Oh, we certainly are." My dad puffed his chest out so far the buttons on his polo shirt strained, looking like he had personally coded the software himself. I always knew this brilliant girl possessed the magic touch. I lingered silently near the backyard punch bowl, passively observing the entire circus. Because that is exactly what it was, a meticulously choreographed circus performance. I had professionally audited enough sinking ships to instantly recognize the classic symptoms of a facade. The luxury vehicle was a high-interest lease, not an asset. The executive assistant trailing Victoria around the yard was painfully obviously a temporary freelancer she had booked on a gig app for the afternoon. The sprawling, modern headquarters she was constantly flaunting on her Instagram stories was merely a shared co-working hub rented by the hour. But the entire extended family was eagerly swallowing the illusion hook, line, and sinker. Celeste. Aunt Margaret successfully cornered me near the appetizer spread. Are you still doing people's taxes for a living? I specialize in forensic auditing, Aunt Margaret. Right. Crunching the numbers. Well, that is a nice, steady little job. She took a sip of her cocktail. You know, you really ought to sit down and ask your sister for some professional networking advice. That girl genuinely knows how to conquer the game. I bit down on the inside of my cheek so aggressively I could literally taste iron. 20 minutes later, I happened to be walking past the kitchen when I caught fragments of a hushed conversation. Victoria desperately needs an additional $60,000 just to temporarily bridge a minor cash flow hiccup, my mom was whispering. It is completely standard operating procedure in the fast-paced startup world. Another 60 grand? That was my dad. His voice lacked its usual arrogant bluster. He sounded genuinely hesitant. Richard, do not even think about doubting her momentum right now. She is inches away from securing a massive buyout. I immediately grabbed my purse and quietly slipped out the side gate, claiming a sudden migraine. It was not entirely a fabrication. My head was pounding. As soon as I locked my car doors, I opened the Notes app on my phone and logged a new entry for my Vitality folder. Asterisk, additional capital injection, $60,000. Source from parents' remaining liquid savings. Zero equity documentation requested. Asterisk. The financial dominoes were perfectly aligned. I just could not mathematically predict exactly how the chain reaction would begin. Victoria managed to intercept me in the dark driveway before I could start the engine. Why do you constantly walk around family events looking like you are attending a wake? I rolled my window down. She was dramatically backlit by the warm string lights my mother had woven through the oak trees, clutching a crystal flute of champagne. She looked every single inch the triumphant tech mogul. That is a very sleek car, I noted flatly. What is the exact monthly lease premium on that? Her arrogant smirk instantly faltered. What the hell is that supposed to imply? Absolutely nothing. I am just professionally curious about your current cash burn rate. I intentionally maintained a deadpan, clinical tone. You just aggressively solicited another 60 grand from mom and dad. That bumps their total exposure up to $660,000. What exactly is your verified monthly recurring revenue? Victoria aggressively closed the distance to my car door. Why the hell are you constantly doing this? Doing what? Asking standard financial questions. Actively trying to sabotage my momentum. Her whisper suddenly turned incredibly venomous. You have been a jealous, pathetic loser since we were in grade school. You simply cannot stomach the fact that I was born the beautiful one, the exceptionally talented one, the daughter that everyone in this family actually wants to be around. I am absolutely not jealous of you, Victoria. I am deeply terrified. Terrified of what exactly? Of where $600,000 of stolen retirement funds is actually disappearing to. For one microscopic fraction of a second, the impenetrable, arrogant mask slipped from her face. Something primal and raw flashed in her pupils. It was pure, unadulterated panic. And then, just as quickly, the wall slammed back down. You need to keep your nose completely out of my corporate business, Celeste. She violently jabbed her acrylic nail toward my face through the open window. You have absolutely no concept of what I am truly capable of achieving. That is precisely what keeps me awake at night. We just stared at each other in the darkness. Two biological sisters who had never actually operated as friends. The emotional chasm separating us felt vastly wider than the physical air between us. Do you want to know what your fundamental flaw is? Victoria sneered, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. Your entire worldview is microscopic. You possess a tiny, insignificant mindset. You are going to waste your entire pathetic existence double-checking other people's brilliant creations because you totally lack the spine to ever build an empire of your own. She aggressively downed the rest of her champagne and proudly strutted back toward the backyard party. I sat perfectly still, watching her walk away. I specifically took note of the slight, uncontrollable tremor vibrating through her hands. Truly confident, successful people do not physically shake when asked about their balance sheets. Guilty people shake. But I currently lacked the tangible, subpoena-worthy proof. And in the twisted ecosystem of my family, raising a verbal suspicion held absolutely zero weight unless there was an audience ready to validate the truth. Driving back to my apartment that night, I finally made a monumental choice. I pulled my sedan over onto a desolate, quiet side street, threw the engine into park, and hosted a brutally honest internal dialogue with my own soul. What were my realistic options here? I could keep aggressively pushing the issue, keep screaming warnings into the void, and keep permanently cementing myself as the jealous, toxic little sister. I had already dispatched the warning email. I had verbally asked the hard questions. I had exhausted every single avenue short of retaining a licensed private investigator. And even if I did hire one, what specific legal statute could I prove she was violating? Executing horrific business strategies is not a federal crime. Lying to your gullible parents about your corporate success is not technically actionable fraud. The brutal, agonizing reality was that my parents were grown, consenting adults. They had willingly finalized their bed, and now they had to sleep in it. And every single time I attempted to throw them a life preserver, I was immediately cast as the evil villain actively trying to drown them. I thought back to a piece of wisdom my grandfather used to share with me. Harold Donovan, my father's dad, was the absolute only human being in my bloodline who had ever taken the time to truly see my worth. Celeste, he would tell me, sitting on his porch, certain lessons simply cannot be taught with words. They must be agonizingly lived. Your ultimate responsibility on this earth is not to save grown adults from their own self-destruction. Your sole job is to ensure you are standing completely outside the blast radius when the bomb finally goes off. He had been gone for 6 years now. I missed his grounding presence every single day. I unlocked my cell phone and dialed my father's number. Celeste, it is incredibly late, he answered gruffly. I am fully aware. I just needed to put something on the record with you. If Victoria approaches you demanding more capital, do not reach out to me for a bailout. I am officially withdrawing my participation from this entire venture. Heavy silence crackled over the cellular towers. I am not issuing this boundary to be vindictive. I pushed forward, keeping my voice steady. I deeply love you. I deeply love Mom. But I absolutely refuse to co-sign a financial disaster that I fundamentally do not believe in. You never did possess an ounce of true family spirit. His voice was absolute, freezing ice. True family spirit is not synonymous with blind, cult-like loyalty, Dad. It is about demanding honesty, especially when the truth is horrifyingly uncomfortable. Good night, Celeste. He aggressively terminated the call. I just sat there in the driver's seat, enveloped by the shadows, and allowed myself to finally feel the crushing, total weight of the moment. I was not maliciously abandoning my family. I was simply refusing to let them drag me down into the watery depths alongside them. And sometimes, choosing not to drown is the most courageous action a person can take. The social isolation began as a slow, creeping frost. Initially, I simply stopped receiving invitations to our traditional Sunday roasts. Your mother is just feeling a bit under the weather, my dad would text me. We are keeping things super intimate this week. But an hour later, I would open Victoria's Instagram stories and watch a video of the entire extended family happily clinking wine glasses around the dining room table. Then, I was quietly removed from the family group chats. I would randomly stumble across Facebook photo albums documenting lavish family excursions, weekend beach getaways, extravagant steakhouse dinners, a luxurious 3-day retreat at a high-end spa resort. All heavily featuring everyone in the bloodline except for me. 3 agonizing months into the freeze-out, I finally received my very first direct communication from my mother. It was a Venmo notification popping up on my lock screen. A request for exactly $52.30. The attached memo read, asterisk, for the instant pot pressure cooker I bought for your kitchen. You can reimburse me whenever. Asterisk. There was no text asking how my life was going. There was no message saying she missed my face. Just a cold, calculated digital invoice for a discounted kitchen appliance. I authorized the transfer without typing a single word in response. The most agonizing aspect of the situation was not the physical exclusion itself. It was the deliberate, aggressive erasure of my existence. My mother uploaded a massive, framed portrait to her social media captioned, asterisk, my absolutely beautiful, perfect family. Asterisk Victoria was standing front and center, glowing, with my parents beaming proudly on either side of her. I was nowhere to be found. I was not mentioned in the comments. I was not missed. I actually discovered the truth about the luxury spa resort vacation from Aunt Margaret, of all people. She called my phone out of the blue to ask why I had bailed on the trip. I literally was not invited, Margaret. Oh, a highly uncomfortable, stretching pause. Well, Victoria explicitly told the group that you were entirely swamped with auditing deadlines. Did she? Honey, you know exactly how chaotic families can get. Everyone just gets so incredibly busy. I am absolutely certain it was not a malicious, intentional slight, but it was violently intentional. With every single family gathering I was absent from, every single photograph I was cropped out of, and every single group conversation that proceeded without my voice, Victoria was systematically rewriting our family history. And my parents were happily holding the pen for her. Let me hit pause right here and ask you a deeply personal question. Have you ever felt like a complete outsider trapped inside your own biological family? Have you ever felt like you were standing directly in the center of a room, but somehow remained completely invisible to everyone around you? If you have experienced that unique kind of pain, please tell me about it down in the comments. What was your survival strategy? Did you keep desperately fighting for their approval, or did you finally step back and protect your peace like I did? And if this narrative is hitting close to home for you, please smash that like button. It genuinely helps validate that I am not alone in this experience. Okay, let us jump back into the timeline, because the suffocating silence was about to violently shatter in a way absolutely none of us could have predicted. Exactly 2 years after the initial $600,000 investment cleared the bank, I received a highly unexpected phone call at my office. Am I speaking with Miss Celeste Donovan? The voice on the other end was incredibly formal, carrying the gravelly texture of an elderly gentleman. My name is Theodore Marsh. I am the senior attorney who represented the estate of your late grandfather, Harold. I almost knocked my hot coffee all over my keyboard. Mr. Marsh? My grandfather passed away years ago. Indeed. It has been exactly 6 years since Harold's passing. I sincerely apologize for the massive delay in contacting you, but I was operating under highly specific, unbreakable instructions. I squeezed the phone tighter against my ear. What kind of instructions? Your grandfather entrusted me with a highly classified set of documents. It was a completely private, supplementary provision attached to his final will. He explicitly demanded that I deliver this information to you personally, only when, and I am directly quoting his exact phrasing here, the time is absolutely right. The air in my office felt suddenly very thin. What exactly does that mean? How on earth would you monitor when the time was right? In all honesty, Miss Donovan, I was not entirely certain of the parameters myself. But Harold was a profoundly wise individual, the lawyer stated softly. And please, forgive my bluntness here. He specifically instructed me, asterisk, when the entire facade finally collapses and things fall apart for Celeste's parents, she is going to desperately need confirmation that she was not insane, and she is going to need a solid foundation to stand on. Asterisk. My throat violently tightened, threatening to choke off my air supply. Even speaking from beyond the grave, Grandpa Harold possessed the unique ability to look right into my soul. Are things officially falling apart over there, Miss Donovan? I thought back to the rows of empty chairs at my high school graduation. I thought about the 3-page warning email that was entirely ignored. I thought about the luxury family vacations I was explicitly erased from, and the $600,000 rapidly evaporating into my sister's delusional fantasy. Not completely, I whispered into the receiver. But I have a strong feeling the foundation is going to crack very, very soon. Then I will be back in touch shortly. Your grandfather maintained tremendous, unshakable faith in your character, you know. Mr. Marsh's voice grew incredibly warm. He sat in my office once and told me, Celeste is the absolute only soul in that entire bloodline who possesses the intellect to decipher the difference between what is actually real and what is just cheap, blinding shine. I physically could not formulate a response for a solid minute. Thank you so much, Mr. Marsh. Do not thank me, kiddo. Thank Harold. The man always knew exactly what he was doing. After the line clicked dead, I sat alone in my corporate office with my lukewarm coffee and finally let myself cry. I did not weep out of sadness or grief. I cried from the overwhelming, euphoric relief of finally being fully seen and validated by a man who was not even walking the earth anymore. Exactly 1 month later, the universe threw another massive curveball into my lap. I was attending a prestigious, high-level financial crimes convention in the heart of downtown Chicago when I bumped into Special Agent Carla Reyes. She actually spotted me in the crowd before I recognized her. Celeste Donovan? With the Sterling and Walsh auditing firm, correct. I turned around to face an incredibly sharp-featured, intimidating woman wearing a tailored navy blazer. A shiny FBI shield was visibly clipped to her leather belt. It took my brain a few seconds to process the face. Agent Reyes. From the Thornton Securities embezzlement investigation. Do you actually remember me? She flashed a brilliant smile. You practically gift-wrapped that federal conviction and handed it to our task force. Your forensic breakdown of those offshore shell company transactions was an absolute masterclass. I was just following the math, I replied humbly. And that is exactly why you are so lethal at your job. She tilted her head, analyzing me. Are you still grinding away in the forensic trenches every single day? Excellent. The Bureau desperately needs more civilian allies who can actually decipher a convoluted balance sheet. She casually reached inside her blazer pocket and handed me a thick, embossed business card. I am officially directing the Regional White-Collar Crime Division now. If you ever happen to stumble across anything highly unusual during your corporate audits, please give my direct line a ring. I stared down at the card. It was minimalist, featuring the official Department of Justice seal stamped in the top corner. What specific definition of unusual are we talking about? Her dark eyes locked onto mine, and suddenly I felt like I was the one being audited. The specific kind of unusual activity that prevents you from sleeping at night. Her gaze was deeply knowing. I have been operating in this federal sector for 15 years, Celeste. You quickly learn how to visually identify when a citizen is dragging around a massive, heavy secret. And you look like you are carrying a tremendously heavy weight. I almost confessed everything to her right then and there. Standing in the middle of a bustling convention hall surrounded by 300 oblivious financial experts, I was half a second away from blurting out, my older sister is executing a massive corporate Ponzi scheme. My parents willingly handed her $600,000 of their retirement, and absolutely nobody in my family will listen to my warnings. But I swallowed the words. It is just standard corporate burnout, I lied smoothly. Sure thing, she did not aggressively push the issue. But if that specific burnout ever manifests with a human name and a verifiable dollar amount attached to it, you know exactly how to reach me. I quietly slipped the FBI business card into the back slot of my leather wallet, tucking it safely behind my driver's license. I aggressively promised myself I would never, ever utilize it. But it is darkly humorous how the promises we make to ourselves are almost always destined to be broken. Exactly 3 years after my parents blindly signed that massive investment check, my cell phone rang on a random Tuesday afternoon. Celeste. My mother's voice chirped through the speaker, aggressively overenthusiastic and too bright. I am calling to finalize the logistics for Thanksgiving. I hovered my thumb over the end call button. Our previous verbal interaction had taken place over 4 months ago, and only because I had sent a highly generic happy birthday message. What exactly about it? We are officially hosting the event at our house this year. It is going to be an absolutely massive gathering. 30 confirmed guests. Extended family, old college friends, even the Hendersons from next door are coming over. Victoria has a highly anticipated, special announcement to make, and we demand that absolutely everyone is present for the big reveal. Another magical announcement, just another manufactured opportunity for Victoria to bask in the glowing spotlight while I was forced to stand quietly in the shadowy corners. I really do not know, Mom. My auditing caseload has been. Celeste. Her tone instantly hardened into cold steel. You will be in attendance. This evening is monumentally important to your sister, and therefore, it is monumentally important to the legacy of this family. Regardless of whatever petty, childish issues we have navigated in the past, we are still your blood. Still family, I wanted to scream with laughter. That specific word held a vastly different, terrifying definition for me than it did for her. What time does the dinner start? I capitulated. 4 o'clock sharp. Please ensure you wear something highly presentable. She paused, letting a threatening silence build. And Celeste? I expect you to try your absolute hardest to be a supportive sister this time around. I will tolerate absolutely zero negativity in my house. Zero negativity, because apparently, raising valid, mathematical concerns about where a $600,000 retirement fund magically vanished to was classified as toxic negativity. I will be there, I confirmed, and hung up. I sat frozen at my sleek corporate desk, staring blankly at the wall. 3 entire years had vanished. Over the course of that timeline, I had successfully secured 2 massive promotions, finalized the mortgage on my own luxury condo, and cultivated a beautiful, peaceful life completely insulated from the toxic relatives who viewed me as disposable. I had successfully trained my brain to stop stalking Victoria's deceptive social media feeds. I had stopped agonizing over the cruel gossip they were undoubtedly sharing at the lavish dinners I was permanently banned from attending. But a tiny, pathetic fragment of my soul, that same little girl who had desperately scoured the high school auditorium bleachers praying to see her parents' faces, still harbored a microscopic ounce of hope. Maybe the dynamic had genuinely shifted. Maybe this specific invitation signaled a truce. I meticulously selected a highly conservative, professional navy blue dress for the occasion. I had absolutely zero idea that I was essentially dressing up to attend a funeral. I pulled into the driveway exactly 15 minutes ahead of schedule. That was my initial, fatal mistake. Oh, fantastic. You arrived early. My mom immediately shoved a balled-up piece of fabric into my chest before I could even shrug off my winter coat. I desperately need you to manage the hot appetizer rotation in the kitchen, and the cocktail station requires immediate restocking. I looked down at the fabric in my hands. It was a cartoonish, humiliating apron featuring a gigantic, cross-eyed bird emblazoned with the phrase, "gobble till you wobble." Where exactly is Victoria? I asked, slipping the ridiculous garment over my tailored dress. She is resting upstairs in the master suite. She has been grinding so incredibly hard on her corporate presentation all week. We really need to ensure she conserves her creative energy for the crowd. Of course she is. I spent the subsequent 60 minutes frantically organizing exotic cheese platters, hauling heavy buckets of ice, and acting as the unofficial coat check girl for guests arriving at the front door. Aunt Margaret, Uncle Thomas, 3 entirely different factions of distant cousins I had not interacted with in a decade. Even the elderly Hendersons, who had literally watched me grow up, stared at me with blank expressions like they could not quite recall my first name. By the time Victoria finally decided to grace us with her presence, the sprawling living room was packed shoulder to shoulder. She dramatically descended the grand staircase exactly like an A-list movie star walking a red carpet. She was draped in a stunning, blood-red designer gown, her makeup professionally contoured, walking in stilettos that unquestionably cost more than my monthly auto loan. Every single head in the room swiveled to face her. The crowd erupted into spontaneous applause. My mother literally wiped a tear of pure, overwhelming joy from her cheek. "Does not she just look absolutely spectacular?" my mom aggressively whispered to Mrs. Henderson. "That is my beautiful, brilliant entrepreneur." I stood awkwardly in the corner next to the crystal punch bowl, still fully armored in my navy dress and my humiliating turkey apron, gripping a heavy glass pitcher of lemonade. Aunt Margaret sidled up right next to me, balancing a plate of hors d'oeuvres. Celeste, are you still doing? What exactly is it that you do again? Federal forensic auditing. Right. Playing with the little numbers. She dismissively waved a cracker in my face. You know, you really ought to swallow your pride and beg your sister for some professional career coaching. She genuinely understands how to dominate the corporate game. From across the crowded room, Victoria's eyes locked directly onto mine. She slowly, mockingly raised her expensive crystal champagne flute in my direction, flashing a wicked smile that communicated exactly how pathetic she thought I was. I maintained intense eye contact and offered a cold, dead smile back. And in that exact second, I forged a silent, unbreakable vow with my own soul. Regardless of what catastrophic nonsense unfolded the rest of the evening, this was officially the absolute final time I would ever allow myself to stand inside this house feeling small. Just before we transitioned to the dining room for the massive feast, my dad aggressively clinked his silverware against his glass, demanding total silence from the crowd. Before we officially sit down to say grace, he projected, standing proudly at the absolute head of the table like a king addressing his loyal subjects. I want to propose a massive, heartfelt toast. A toast to family loyalty, to unimaginable success, and specifically to my brilliant daughter Victoria, who has definitively proven that the Donovan bloodline knows exactly how to dream on a massive scale. Uproarious applause physically rippled through the living room. 30 adoring guests, all raising their champagne flutes high into the air. Exactly 3 years ago today, Margaret and I executed the absolute greatest financial investment of our entire lives. We proudly injected $600,000 into Vitality Wellness Solutions. He beamed with pure, unadulterated pride at Victoria. And I am overwhelmingly ecstatic to announce tonight that our seed capital is currently paying dividends that far exceed our wildest, most ambitious dreams. I stood perfectly paralyzed over by the wooden sideboard, my hands tightly gripping a ceramic gravy boat. Now, I certainly do not want to maliciously exclude our other daughter from the festivities, my dad continued, rapidly shifting his gaze toward me. The warm, booming joy instantly vanished from his tone, replaced by dripping condescension. Celeste, we sincerely hope that someday soon, you will finally swallow your stubborn ego and take some comprehensive notes from your sister. Maybe you can finally figure out how to stop hopelessly grinding away for other people's companies and actually attempt to construct an empire of your own. Cruel, mocking laughter instantly erupted. 30 adults, actively laughing at my expense. After all, my dad pushed forward, highly encouraged by the audience's reaction. Every society desperately requires a mindless little worker bee to handle the grunt work while the rest of us visionaries focus on thinking big. Is not that right, Celeste? The laughter intensified. Uncle Thomas aggressively slapped his thigh in amusement. Aunt Margaret politely covered her giggling mouth with a cloth napkin. My mother happily joined the assassination. Oh, do not worry about it, honey. Being a standard, everyday employee is a perfectly respectable existence, too. Not every single human being is genetically engineered to be a powerful leader. I methodically scanned the crowd. I silently counted the faces. 30 separate individuals who had just eagerly listened to my father publicly brand me as an utter, pathetic failure. 30 people actively nodding along in agreement. 30 people who would permanently weaponize this humiliating memory against me at every future family function. I slowly placed the ceramic gravy boat down onto the wood. I did not shed a single tear. I was light years past the capacity to cry over these people. But I ruthlessly memorized every single smirking face, every chuckling relative, and every guest who found my public execution highly entertaining. Because somewhere deep inside my marrow, I inherently knew that the final chapter of this story had not been written yet. Ding dong. The sharp ring of the front doorbell violently pierced the laughter. My mom deeply frowned at the sudden interruption. Who on earth could possibly be arriving right now? Every single RSVP is already in the room. She handed her linen napkin over to my dad and marched toward the grand foyer. I watched the entire scene unfold from my isolated outpost by the wall, still clutching a metal serving spoon, still draped in that utterly ridiculous cartoon turkey apron. My mother pulled the heavy wooden door open. Two individuals dressed in sharp, immaculate dark suits were standing rigidly on the front porch. The woman standing in the lead confidently raised a leather wallet, flashing a glowing, gold federal badge. "Mrs. Donovan? I am Special Agent Carla Reyes with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is my partner, Agent Morrison. Do we have your permission to step inside?" The massive, crowded living room instantly plummeted into a horrifying, suffocating silence. 30 guests simultaneously pivoted toward the foyer, moving together like a synchronized hive mind. The FBI? My mom's voice violently cracked, sounding like a terrified mouse. There absolutely must be some kind of clerical mistake. There is absolutely zero mistake. Carla forcefully stepped over the threshold, her razor-sharp eyes aggressively scanning the sea of faces until they instantly locked onto my older sister. "We are currently looking to apprehend Victoria Donovan." Every single drop of blood instantly evaporated from Victoria's face, leaving her looking like a reanimated corpse. She stood totally paralyzed in her stunning red gown, her crystal champagne flute trembling violently in her grip. What exactly is the meaning of this outrage? My dad aggressively stormed forward, puffing out his chest. "This is a strictly private, closed-door family gathering." Victoria Donovan, Carla's authoritative voice effortlessly sliced through his pathetic bluster. "You are officially under federal arrest for multiple counts of felony securities fraud and felony wire fraud, executed in direct connection with the corporate entity known as Vitality Wellness Solutions. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be utilized as evidence against you in a federal court of law." Agent Morrison swiftly bypassed my father, marching directly toward Victoria, brandishing a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The living room completely detonated. People were audibly gasping in horror. Frantic, panicked whispers echoed off the walls. Somebody in the back row dropped a wine glass, shattering crystal across the hardwood floor. And through all the chaotic, deafening madness, Carla's dark eyes slowly drifted across the room until they found mine. She offered me the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod of her chin. It was not a nod of wicked conspiracy. I had not dialed her direct line. I had not formally reported my family to the task force. It was simply raw recognition. One seasoned, lethal professional silently acknowledging another across a crowded battlefield. I stood perfectly still, fully wrapped in my humiliating turkey apron, and watched in total silence as my family's meticulously constructed, glamorous fantasy world violently burned to the ground. Victoria unleashed a blood-curdling scream. It was a horrifying, primal sound that I had never, ever heard her produce before. It was the desperate, terrifying shriek of a cornered animal who had just realized every single exit door was permanently bolted shut. "No." Victoria violently thrashed her arms as Agent Morrison aggressively wrenched her wrists behind her back, securing the cold steel cuffs. "You absolutely cannot do this to me. I have not executed a single illegal action. Ma'am, I highly advise you to calm down immediately. This was all Dad's idea." The chaotic living room instantly froze into a terrifying, absolute silence. My dad's face morphed into a horrific shade of sickly gray. Daddy explicitly ordered me to do it. Victoria was hysterically sobbing now, thick, black mascara violently streaking down her contoured cheeks. He explicitly told me that if we mathematically faked the quarterly investor reports, we could secure massive rounds of additional venture funding. He swore to me that absolutely nobody would ever double-check the math. He physically sat next to me and helped me draft the fraudulent financial projections. "Victoria." My dad's voice was a terrified, barely audible croak. "Shut your mouth right now. You swore a promise that you would protect me." She aggressively lunged her body toward him, the heavy steel handcuffs violently clinking together. "You swore to me it was just creative corporate accounting. You literally told me that every successful CEO in Silicon Valley operates exactly like this." My mom frantically grabbed the wooden back of a dining chair, violently swaying on her feet. "Richard, what on earth is she screaming about?" "Margaret, sweetheart, I can easily explain all of this. You explicitly knew?" My mom's voice escalated into a horrifying, shattered shriek. You knew she was executing a massive federal crime, and you kept it a secret from me? It was absolutely never supposed to escalate to this level. The venture investors were never supposed to dig into the algorithms. My mother's eyes rolled into the back of her head, and she completely collapsed, crumbling toward the hardwood floor. 3 different relatives frantically dove forward to catch her limp body. Mrs. Henderson began hysterically screaming for someone to fetch a glass of water. Uncle Thomas wildly ripped his cell phone out of his pocket and dialed 911. Amidst the absolute, untethered chaos of my family's implosion, Carla calmly continued reciting the remainder of the Miranda rights to my sobbing sister. Her voice remained chillingly steady and entirely professional. I did not move a single muscle. I stood there like a ghost. I watched my panicked father desperately attempt to slap my mother back into consciousness. I watched my golden child sister being forcefully marched toward the front door by a federal agent, aggressively screaming vile accusations at the man who had funded her delusions. I watched 30 arrogant guests witness the complete, spectacular destruction of the exact identity my parents had built their entire superiority complex around. And I felt absolutely nothing. There was zero sadistic satisfaction. There was zero glorious, triumphant vindication. There was just a massive, hollow void sitting in the exact place where my anger and resentment used to reside. This was not a sweet victory. This was the horrific experience of standing on your front lawn watching your childhood home burn to the ground, fully knowing that you had desperately tried to warn the occupants about the faulty electrical wiring years ago, only for them to maliciously brand you as insane for smelling the smoke. The emergency paramedics arrived within minutes and medically cleared my mother. It was just a stress-induced fainting spell. There was no permanent neurological damage. She sat slouched on the living room sofa, a thick wool blanket tightly wrapped around her trembling shoulders, looking a solid 2 decades older than she had just 60 minutes prior. Agent Carla Reyes quietly pulled me aside near the grand foyer, establishing a perimeter away from the hysterical guests. "I want to make one detail incredibly clear to you right now," she stated in a hushed, intense whisper. "You did not pull the trigger on this raid. I am well aware of that. The formal investigation was triggered exclusively by external venture capitalists. They grew highly suspicious of the burn rate and contracted an elite team of independent auditors exactly 6 months ago after catching massive, glaring inconsistencies in the quarterly revenue reports. Your sister was systematically siphoning massive amounts of capital from multiple, high-profile investors. We are tracking nearly $2.8 million in stolen assets. Your parents' initial $600,000 injection was merely the opening act of the scam. $2.8 million. My stomach violently churned with nausea. And regarding your father's active involvement, Carla hesitated, her eyes narrowing. We are going to be initiating a highly aggressive probe into those specific allegations. She let out a heavy sigh. But Celeste, the crucial point I want to drill into your head is that you bear absolutely zero responsibility for this catastrophe. I obviously recognized your face from the financial summit, but our paths crossing here tonight is purely coincidental. Everyone in that living room is going to assume I maliciously reported her to the task force out of spite. Let them spin whatever pathetic narrative helps them sleep at night. You and I both know the verified truth." She briefly glanced back over her shoulder at the sea of shell-shocked, whispering relatives. "And for what it is worth, if these arrogant people had actually bothered to read your analysis 3 years ago, this entire nightmare might have been contained to a manageable $600,000 internal family loss, instead of exploding into massive federal indictments and mandatory prison sentences." She reached into her blazer and handed me a card. It was not her official FBI Gold Seal card. It was a direct contact number for Federal Victim Support Services. "Your parents are going to desperately require this lifeline," she advised grimly. "They are almost certainly going to be totally annihilated by the impending civil lawsuits." I accepted the card with totally numb fingers. Before she marched out the door, Carla turned back to face me one last time. "By the way, your grandfather, Harold Donovan? His name popped up in a few of our deep dive background checks regarding the family's assets. From everything our agents uncovered, the man was an absolute, uncompromising straight arrow. He would have been overwhelmingly proud of the woman you became. And then, she was gone. And I was left standing entirely alone in the wreckage of my parents' grand foyer, holding a tragic victim services hotline card, fully strapped into a cartoon turkey apron, listening to my mother violently sobbing into a throw pillow in the adjacent room. This is exactly what the unvarnished truth looks like. It is never pretty. The Thanksgiving guests aggressively fled the property like the building was contaminated with radiation. Aunt Margaret did not even bother to offer a polite goodbye. The Hendersons practically sprinted across the lawn to their sedan. Within 30 excruciating minutes, the massive, opulent living room that had comfortably hosted 30 cheering sycophants was entirely empty, save for the immediate, shattered family. My dad finally tracked me down in the kitchen, where I had retreated to silently unknot the strings of that humiliating apron. Celeste. His voice sounded like rocks grinding in a blender. I desperately need your professional help. I meticulously folded the turkey apron into a perfect square and placed it gently onto the granite counter. You are incredibly gifted with complex financial matrices, he pleaded, his eyes wild with terror. You could easily testify as an expert witness on my behalf. You can clearly explain to the federal prosecutors that I lacked the technical literacy to understand what Victoria was actually executing behind the scenes. You can swear under oath that I am simply a naive retiree who blindly trusted his brilliant daughter. I slowly turned around and looked directly into my father's eyes. I really, truly looked at the pathetic man standing in front of me. The exact same man who had maliciously branded me a worker bee just an hour ago. The man who had orchestrated a room full of 30 people to aggressively mock my career. The man who had callously ignored my desperate, mathematically proven warnings simply because they were delivered by the wrong daughter. Dad, you knew exactly what you were doing. I absolutely did not. You actively helped her forge the quarterly profit reports. She literally screamed it as they were dragging her out the door. She is in a state of absolute panic, Celeste. She has no earthly idea what she is spewing right now. I have the digital timestamped email. The words tumbled out of my mouth completely flat and devoid of emotion. Exactly 3 years ago, I drafted and sent you and Mom a highly detailed, comprehensive forensic analysis outlining every single fraudulent red flag buried inside Vitality's financials. You opened it. You read it. His face drained of whatever tiny fraction of color it had left. That, an email does not legally prove. I am absolutely not going to walk into a federal courthouse and testify against your character, I stated, picking up my leather purse from the stool. But I am absolutely not going to sit on a witness stand and commit felony perjury to save your skin either. Celeste, you are my own flesh and blood. This is your family. Yes. I locked my icy gaze onto his. And healthy, functional families do not actively demand that their children commit federal crimes to cover up their messes. Celeste, I am begging you. You are the one who aggressively taught me the paramount value of honesty, Dad. Do you happen to remember the afternoon I was 8 years old and I lied to your face about shattering that crystal vase? You immediately grounded me to my bedroom for an entire month, explicitly because Donovan family members do not lie. He stood there with his mouth slightly open, completely lacking a counterargument. Donovan family members always tell the absolute truth, I repeated coldly. Or, at the very least, one of us still does. I walked directly past him, navigating through the devastated living room where my mother was still violently weeping on the sofa, and I marched straight out the front door. I did not glance over my shoulder a single time. I was halfway down the concrete driveway, keys jingling in my hand, when I heard frantic, clicking footsteps rushing up behind me. Celeste, please wait. Aunt Margaret was standing in the freezing November wind, her arms tightly wrapped around her torso to ward off the chill. She looked significantly smaller, older, and vastly more fragile than I had ever perceived her to be. I really wanted to say, she faltered, her teeth visibly chattering. I am so incredibly sorry. I completely stopped walking and turned to face her. For what specific action exactly? For everything. For deliberately refusing to see reality. She took a massive, violently shaky breath, tears pooling in her eyes. For laughing right along with the crowd when your father, when he said those horrific, cruel things about your career. You did significantly more than just laugh at me, Aunt Margaret. You explicitly instructed me to bow down and learn how to be a success from Victoria. Multiple times. Over the span of multiple years. I know. Hot tears finally spilled over her frozen cheeks. I was entirely wrong. Every single one of us was completely wrong about her. I deeply studied her face under the glow of the street lamp, aggressively hunting for a shred of genuine sincerity. I definitely found it, but I also uncovered something deeply tragic lingering right beside it. It was the specific, pathetic brand of regret that only miraculously materializes the exact second catastrophic consequences finally knock on the front door. You are not apologizing to me right now because you experienced a sudden moral awakening and realized your behavior was unacceptable, I stated slowly, dissecting her motivations. You are only apologizing because you are deeply humiliated that you finally realized Victoria was not the flawless deity you worshipped. She aggressively flinched like I had slapped her. Celeste, that is absolutely not. It is perfectly fine, Margaret. I hit the unlock button on my key fob. I am not pointing that out to be unnecessarily vicious. I am explicitly stating it because I sacrificed years of my sanity desperately attempting to force you people to look at the blazing fire raging right in front of your faces, and absolutely nobody would listen to me. So, please forgive me if I refuse to jump up and down with joy just because you decided to say sorry after the FBI literally raided the dining room. What can I possibly do to make this right? I truly pondered the question for a moment. The very next time someone in this bloodline is being actively dismissed, maliciously overlooked, or publicly laughed at, I suggest you find the courage to speak up before the absolute disaster strikes. Not after the cuffs come out. I climbed into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut. Celeste. Margaret cried out over the hum of the engine as I rolled the window down. For whatever it is worth right now, your grandfather Harold always loudly proclaimed that you were the absolute only child in this family who would always land safely on her feet. I shifted the car into reverse and backed out into the dark street without offering a final response. But as I drove away from the burning wreckage of my family, I held onto those specific words tightly, feeling Grandpa Harold's protective spirit watching over me from the passenger seat. Let me pause the narrative here for a quick second. If Aunt Margaret came sprinting down the driveway to offer you that exact apology, would you have gracefully forgiven her in the moment? Or would you have felt, exactly like I did, that her remorse was significantly too little and delivered way too late? I am genuinely curious about your emotional boundaries, so please drop your honest answer down in the comments. And while you are currently reflecting on that, if this story is causing you to feel any kind of deep, righteous anger or validation, please smash that like button. It genuinely helps validate that my experience matters. Now, let me outline the insane legal and personal fallout that dominated the subsequent weeks. Exactly 3 days following the Thanksgiving nightmare, my phone rang. It was Theodore Marsh. Miss Donovan, his elderly, gravelly voice echoed through the speaker. I firmly believe the time we discussed has finally arrived. Mr. Marsh's downtown law office looked exactly like a Hollywood set designer's vision of a 70-year-old estate attorney's headquarters. It was heavily paneled in dark, rich mahogany, smelling strongly of old leather and featuring massive walls lined with ancient, dusty legal tomes that probably had not been cracked open since the Cold War. He politely gestured for me to take a seat in a heavy leather wingback chair. Your late grandfather Harold scheduled a highly confidential meeting with me roughly 4 years ago, just a few short months prior to his passing. Mr. Marsh slowly opened a thick manila folder on his desk. He requested that I draft and append a highly specific codicil to his final will and testament. It was a supplementary provision that was mandated to be kept strictly segregated and entirely confidential. Why would he want it kept completely separate? Because he absolutely, under no circumstances, wanted your father to discover its existence until after the primary estate was totally settled and finalized. Mr. Marsh slid a heavy, watermarked legal document across the polished wood. Harold formally transferred full ownership of the Lake Geneva property entirely over to you. I stared blindly at the thick, black ink. Lake Geneva. Grandpa's massive, beautiful, rustic waterfront cabin. It was the exact sanctuary where we had spent countless childhood summers fishing off the wooden dock, reading novels in the sun, and happily avoiding any conversation of substance, just peacefully existing in each other's orbit. I had naturally assumed the deed had been quietly transferred to my father along with the rest of the financial estate. The current market valuation of the waterfront property sits at approximately $900,000, Mr. Marsh continued seamlessly. It has been meticulously maintained by a premium property management firm, entirely funded through a sequestered, independent trust that Harold cleverly established. The deed is officially yours, completely free and clear of any encumbrances. My hands violently trembled as I picked up the heavy parchment. He also instructed me to deliver this personal letter. Mr. Marsh handed me a sealed, yellowed envelope bearing my name, written in Grandpa's unmistakable, shaky cursive script. I carefully tore the seal open. Asterisk, my dearest Celeste. If you are sitting down reading this letter right now, it unfortunately means that everything has likely fallen apart in the exact, catastrophic manner I always deeply feared it would. I am so incredibly sorry that I could not do more to shield you from the blast while I was still walking the earth. Your father is my biological son, and I love him, but that genetic tie does absolutely nothing to blind me to his massive, destructive faults. Asterisk. Asterisk, you were always the absolute only soul in that house who viewed the world clearly. This lake house is officially yours because I know deep in my bones that you will nurture and protect it with the exact same fierce dedication that I always knew you would use to protect yourself. I see you, my sweet girl. I always did. Love, Grandpa Harold. Asterisk. I sat in Theodore Marsh's intimidating office and openly wept for 20 solid minutes. He quietly slid a box of expensive tissues across the desk and did not utter a single, interrupting word. Sometimes, allowing a heavy silence to breathe is the absolute kindest gesture a human can offer. Toxic news travels at warp speed inside broken family ecosystems. Exactly 2 weeks later, my cell phone lit up with my mother's contact info. Your father just received notice that Dad left you the entire Lake Geneva property, she blurted out, bypassing any standard greeting. No asterisk, hello, Celeste. Asterisk, no asterisk, how are you holding up after the raid? Asterisk. I literally just found out about the transfer myself. That specific piece of real estate was absolutely supposed to be inherited by your father. It was Harold's primary asset. It fundamentally belongs with the core family unit. I am a biological member of this family unit, Mom. A highly tense pause hummed over the line. Regardless, you urgently need to list the property for sale immediately. The liquid proceeds need to be equitably distributed to cover Victoria's mounting legal defense fees. Excuse me? Absolutely not. Celeste, you are completely failing to grasp the gravity of our reality. Your sister is actively staring down a terrifying list of federal felony charges. Your father is officially facing a grand jury indictment as a co-conspirator. We have been forced to retain incredibly expensive defense attorneys just to keep them out of a cell. The defrauded corporate investors are aggressively filing massive, coordinated civil lawsuits against us. We are on the brink of losing absolutely everything we own. And I am genuinely, profoundly sorry that you are enduring that nightmare, I stated calmly. But I am absolutely not going to liquidate my grandfather's sacred sanctuary to finance the legal consequences of a scam I explicitly warned you about 3 years ago. You are acting completely, disgustingly selfish. I actually let out a dark, bitter laugh. Selfish? Is that seriously the vocabulary word we are utilizing? When you and Dad aggressively liquidated your entire retirement safety net and proudly handed it over to Victoria without even bothering to ask for my professional, licensed opinion, that magically was not classified as selfish. That was warmly branded as a strategic investment. That was just blatant, toxic favoritism wrapped up in corporate buzzwords. I took a deep, steadying breath. You aggressively shoved all of your chips onto the wrong daughter, and now that your golden child has bankrupted you, you are desperately demanding the invisible daughter swoop in and bail you out. Heavy, suffocating silence. I deeply love you, Mom, I said, and I genuinely meant it. But extending my love does not require me to literally set my own life on fire just to keep you warm. Grandpa Harold deliberately gifted me that property because he inherently trusted my judgment. I will absolutely not betray his final wish. Your grandfather would be deeply, horribly ashamed of your behavior right now. No, my voice turned to absolute, freezing steel. He is the absolute only person in this bloodline who would not be. I firmly ended the call. And then I officially blocked her cell phone number. Not for the rest of eternity, but strictly until I could figure out how to breathe oxygen without feeling suffocated by their chaos. I drove up to Lake Geneva that exact weekend. I slowly walked through the silent, empty rooms, gently running my fingertips over the rough wooden support beams that Grandpa had installed with his own 2 hands. And as I looked out over the sparkling water, I allowed myself to finally feel, for the very first time in my adult life, like I organically belong somewhere. I eventually unblocked my mother's number about a week later. Certain agonizing conversations simply cannot be dodged forever. They demand face-to-face confrontation. We agreed to meet at a busy, local coffee shop, a highly public, neutral battleground. My dad tagged along as well. He looked physically hollowed out, appearing a full decade older than the arrogant man who had toasted his own genius at Thanksgiving. My mom's hands were visibly vibrating as she lifted her paper cup to take a sip of scalding tea. Before either of you attempt to formulate an argument, I initiated the dialogue, keeping my posture rigid. I want to establish the absolute parameters of this meeting. I am not sitting here to engage in a screaming match. I am sitting here to establish non-negotiable boundaries. Boundaries. My dad repeated the term like I had just spoken to him in ancient Latin. Yes. And here is exactly where the perimeter is drawn. I retrieved a neatly folded sheet of notebook paper from my purse. I had physically written the demands down because I knew the overwhelming adrenaline would likely cause me to lose my nerve. I love both of you. I am absolutely not permanently cutting you out of my existence. However, I will absolutely not provide a single dime of financial subsidization for Victoria's criminal defense strategy, nor will I contribute to any civil restitution settlements. I will absolutely not take the witness stand and commit felony perjury by testifying to a false narrative. And most importantly, I will absolutely never apologize for being the only daughter who tried to desperately warn you about the cliff you were driving off of. My mom aggressively opened her mouth to protest. I instantly held up a flat palm to silence her. I am not finished speaking. If you harbor any desire to maintain a relationship with me moving forward, that dynamic must be entirely predicated on mutual respect. It cannot be based on what specific financial favors I can execute for you. It cannot involve constantly comparing my achievements to Victoria's failures. You must actively commit to finally seeing me as an equal, autonomous human being. We have always, my mom weakly attempted to interject. You absolutely have not. And I have wasted 34 years of my sanity silently pretending that the abuse was acceptable. I aggressively folded the notebook paper and slapped it down onto the table. It is not acceptable. It literally never was. My dad numbly stared down at his black coffee, watching the steam rise. We genuinely, catastrophically messed this entire thing up, did not we? Yes, you absolutely did. This interaction was not a miraculous forgiveness ceremony. It was not a tearful, cinematic reconciliation. But it was raw, unfiltered honesty. It was likely the very first droplet of authentic truth our family had ever shared. I honestly have absolutely no idea how to even begin fixing this, my mom whispered, fresh tears spilling over her lashes. I do not possess the magical blueprint either, I admitted softly. But we cannot possibly begin to repair the structural damage until we officially admit the foundation is completely shattered. We just sat there in the corner booth. 3 individuals who shared identical DNA, but had entirely forgotten how to share a shred of basic humanity. It was a highly painful, deeply awkward, but wildly necessary starting line. Exactly 6 months following the Thanksgiving raid, the federal legal hammer finally dropped. Victoria officially pled guilty to 3 massive counts of federal wire fraud and 2 severe counts of securities fraud. The presiding federal judge exhibited absolutely zero sympathy for her highly choreographed courtroom tears or the aggressive pleading of her high-priced defense team. She was sentenced to 5 solid years in a federal penitentiary, with absolutely zero possibility for early parole. My dad was formally indicted as a financial co-conspirator. His exhausting legal battle dragged on for several agonizing months, bleeding his accounts dry, but his attorneys eventually negotiated a plea arrangement. He accepted a 2-year suspended prison sentence, 3 grueling years of strict federal probation, and a permanent, lifetime ban from participating in any capacity within the financial investment sector. But the impending civil lawsuits were infinitely more devastating. The 8 defrauded corporate investors, who had collectively suffered an astronomical $2.8 million in verified losses, launched a highly coordinated, aggressive civil litigation campaign. My parents' sprawling suburban house was the very first asset to be seized and liquidated. Next went the luxury vehicles. Then, what minuscule fractions remained of their drained retirement portfolios were aggressively garnished. By the time the massive legal settlements were officially inked, my parents were left with absolute zero. They were forced to relocate into a tiny, 2-bedroom apartment situated in a highly depressing complex that perpetually smelled of damp mildew and lingering regret. I drove over to visit them exactly once. The unit was suffocatingly cramped, awkwardly stuffed with massive, ornate furniture from their previous mansion that clearly did not fit the floor plan. Highly noticeably, every single framed photograph of Victoria had been completely scrubbed from the drywall. Our monthly Social Security checks barely managed to cover the base rent, my dad stated flatly, staring blankly at a peeling patch of wallpaper. Barely. My mom sat silently in a ratty corner armchair, staring blankly out the smudged window at nothing in particular. She had completely given up on dyeing her hair. The rapid onset of stark gray roots made her appear positively ancient. I did not drive over here to maliciously gloat, I announced, breaking the depressing silence. Then why exactly are you here? My dad asked defensively. I gently placed a heavy paper grocery bag onto the cheap laminate kitchen counter. It was stocked strictly with survival basics, fresh loaves of bread, gallons of milk, and rows of canned soup. Because you are still my biological parents. My dad slowly looked over at the grocery bag and then back at my face. A profound, devastating shift occurred in his tired eyes. We honestly do not deserve this kind of charity from you. No, I softly agreed. You absolutely do not. But this gesture has absolutely nothing to do with what you deserve. I walked out of the dingy apartment without offering either of them a hug. Not because I was attempting to be unnecessarily cruel, but simply because my body was not emotionally ready to bridge that physical gap. And I permitted myself to be perfectly okay with that reality. True emotional healing is never a linear, upward trajectory. Authentic forgiveness is rarely an instantaneous miracle. Sometimes, the absolute maximum expression of love you can manage to offer looks exactly like a bag of basic groceries abandoned on a cheap kitchen counter, and absolutely nothing more. The devastating social fallout was somehow almost infinitely worse for them than the federal legal consequences. Within a mere 30 days of the highly publicized arrests, my parents' elite, carefully curated social circle completely evaporated into thin air. The wealthy couples they had routinely vacationed with in the Hamptons suddenly lost their phone numbers. The prestigious church ministry group my mother had proudly commanded for 15 years actively ghosted her. The exclusive country club my dad had based his entire superiority complex around silently revoked his membership. They were completely, utterly eradicated from polite society. Aunt Margaret proactively kept me in the loop with constant updates, even though I explicitly never asked for the gossip. Your poor mother was officially requested to step down from the Women's Ministry Board. She gossiped to me over a lengthy phone call. Somebody on the committee apparently made a highly passive-aggressive comment about not wanting to attract federal scrutiny to their charity events. She let out a heavy sigh. And your father, his lifelong golfing buddies, completely stopped returning his voicemails. You know that massive retirement gala they were organizing for Bill Henderson? Your father was explicitly barred from attending after 20 years of supposedly rock-solid friendship. I thought back to that crowded Thanksgiving living room. 30 arrogant people maliciously laughing at my expense. 30 sycophants raising their crystal glasses to toast Victoria's fraudulent success. Where exactly are all of those loyal supporters hiding now? I asked coldly. Margaret remained dead silent for a long, heavy moment. Nowhere. That is the brutal, defining characteristic of fair-weather friends, Celeste. They are only present when the sky is perfectly sunny. I did not feel a massive rush of sadistic satisfaction hearing about their social ruin. I honestly just felt overwhelmingly exhausted by the entire ordeal. Your parents consistently ask about your well-being, you know, Margaret quickly added, trying to pivot the mood. Your mother, especially. She randomly brings up your name during every single conversation we have. What exactly does she say? She constantly cries about how desperately she wishes she had just listened to your warnings. She says she physically cannot stomach looking at old family photo albums because she cannot comprehend how incredibly, stupidly blind she was. What else does she say? She says she is overwhelmingly, intensely proud of you for managing to turn out so incredibly successful despite absolutely every single thing they got disastrously wrong. I honestly did not know how to emotionally process that information. The very parents who had gleefully laughed in my face, who had aggressively chosen to prioritize Victoria at every crucial intersection of my life, who had viciously labeled me as selfish for refusing to liquidate my inheritance to cover their criminal fees, were they genuinely, structurally capable of evolving? I honestly lacked the answer. But I did notice one highly specific, undeniable pattern. They had not begged me for a single dollar in over 6 months. They had not attempted to enforce any toxic demands. Perhaps that restraint was a sign of genuine psychological progress. Or perhaps they had just finally, entirely run out of assets to systematically exploit. While my biological family was completely disintegrating into ash, I was quietly, methodically piecing my own reality together. The massive corporate promotion materialized exactly 6 months following the Thanksgiving raid. I was officially elevated to the prestigious role of Director of Forensic Auditing. The title came with a gorgeous corner office boasting a skyline view, a dedicated team of 8 brilliant junior analysts reporting directly to my desk, and a compensation package that literally caused me to blink twice when I opened the official offer letter. My firm's senior partner aggressively shook my hand during the champagne announcement. You have 100% earned this elevation, Celeste. This industry desperately requires vastly more leaders equipped with your unshakable integrity. Integrity, the exact same character trait my toxic family had maliciously branded as jealous stubbornness and a severe lack of team spirit. I began dedicating almost all of my free weekends to escaping to the Lake Geneva property. I hired an independent contractor to completely overhaul the outdated plumbing, applied fresh coats of vibrant paint to the dreary bedrooms, and meticulously restored the rotting wooden dock where Grandpa Harold and I used to spend hours casting fishing lines. I intentionally carved out a beautiful, sun-drenched reading nook in the corner of the living room boasting the best natural light, officially christening it Harold's Corner. And crucially, I finally began attending professional therapy. It was absolutely not an easy process. Nothing fundamentally worth undertaking ever is. But sitting on a couch in Dr. Patterson's tranquil office every single Tuesday evening, systematically unpacking 3 agonizing decades of feeling entirely invisible, and actively rewiring my brain to recognize my own inherent value, it permanently altered something deep within my DNA. You literally spent 30 years of your existence desperately seeking validation from individuals who were psychologically incapable of providing it, Dr. Patterson gently explained to me during one particularly intense session. That is absolutely not a tragic character flaw on your part. That was simply a necessary survival tactic for a neglected child. But you are absolutely no longer merely surviving. She was incredibly right. I was finally building an empire. When spring finally rolled around, I serendipitously met someone. His name was James, and he was, ironically enough, a master carpenter. I knew Grandpa Harold would have deeply appreciated the poetic humor in that. James was incredibly quiet, deeply steady, and possessed the remarkably rare quality of actually showing up exactly when he promised he would, and genuinely meaning every single word that exited his mouth. During our third dinner date, he seemed genuinely perplexed as to why I appeared so incredibly shocked that he had actually called me when he promised he would. I am just entirely unaccustomed to human beings actually honoring their given word, I admitted, staring down at my pasta. He smoothly reached across the candlelit table and gently enveloped my hand in his. Then you need to let me get you completely used to it. There were zero massive, theatrical, cinematic gestures. There were zero dramatic, empty promises of eternal devotion. There was just quiet presence, unwavering consistency, and all the essential, foundational elements I had been aggressively starving for my entire life. Exactly 1 full year after the catastrophic Thanksgiving raid, my cell phone vibrated with an incoming text message from an unblocked number. Mom. Could you possibly spare a moment to call me whenever you are free? I absolutely do not require anything from you. I genuinely just want to hear your voice. I sat and stared at that glowing digital bubble for 2 agonizing hours before finally finding the courage to initiate the call. The initial conversation was incredibly clunky. It was heavily punctuated by agonizingly long silences and awkward false starts, but the fundamental energy was undeniably different. I want to make it explicitly clear right off the bat that I am absolutely not calling to request a financial handout, my mom blurted out the second I said hello. I desperately need you to know that. Okay. I have actively started attending sessions with a licensed therapist. Your father stubbornly insists it is a massive waste of capital, but she let out a deeply weak, exhausted laugh. I firmly believe I urgently needed an objective professional to help me visually process the horrific things I was entirely too arrogant to see on my own. And what specific things are you seeing now? The catastrophic extent to which I completely failed you as a mother. Her voice violently cracked. I have been obsessively agonizing over old family photo albums. Specifically, your high school graduation. I was not sitting in the audience, Celeste. My brilliantly intelligent daughter was actively delivering the valedictorian address to a massive crowd, and I literally was not there because I chose to prioritize Victoria attending a meaningless commercial audition. I definitely remember. How on earth do you possess those memories without harboring pure, unadulterated hatred for me? I truly paused and thought about my answer. I absolutely did harbor pure hatred for you for a very long time. But hatred is an incredibly heavy boulder to drag around, Mom. I simply grew entirely exhausted from carrying the weight of it. She openly wept then. It was not the fake, theatrical, manipulative weeping I had grown so accustomed to dealing with. It was something entirely raw, hideously ugly, and profoundly real. I am so incredibly sorry. I am just so sorry. And I am not saying that because I secretly desire something from you. I am saying it because I owe you a massive, foundational apology that I should have delivered over a decade ago. I did not offer her the cheap comfort of saying it is okay, because the abuse definitively was not okay. But I did say, thank you so much for finally acknowledging that. Can we attempt to slowly build something new? I absolutely do not expect you to magically forget the trauma. I just desperately want a tiny chance to prove I can do better. I sat back and watched a breathtaking golden sunset reflect off the peaceful, sparkling water through the massive windows of my lake house. We can slowly try, I stated with deep caution. It certainly was not total forgiveness. It was miles away from establishing genuine trust. But it was a heavy door deliberately left cracked slightly open. And for the time being, that microscopic opening would have to be sufficient. Exactly 18 months following the FBI raid, I made the grueling drive out to the Alderson Federal Prison Camp tucked away in the mountains of West Virginia. I honestly could not articulate exactly what compelled me to make the journey. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity. Perhaps it was the desperate need for total psychological closure that my therapist constantly insisted I deserved. Or perhaps it was just the undeniable, haunting reality that despite the horrific destruction she had caused, Victoria was still biologically my older sister. The official visitor's room was aggressively illuminated by harsh, buzzing fluorescent tubes and radiated a deeply depressing energy. Victoria slowly shuffled into the room wearing generic, oversized khaki prison scrubs. She was completely devoid of her signature contoured makeup, and her previously flawless blonde hair was aggressively yanked back into a greasy, limp ponytail. She looked absolutely nothing like the glamorous, untouchable woman draped in a blood-red designer gown who had haughtily descended my parents' staircase. "Why exactly are you sitting here?" she demanded, completely skipping any polite preamble. "Same old, defensive Victoria." "I honestly do not know," I admitted softly. "I just felt like I needed to physically see you." She heavily dropped into the metal chair situated across the steel table, placing her hands totally flat against the surface. "Did you drive all the way out here just to sadistically gloat over my ruin?" "No. You are a liar." "Victoria, if I genuinely harbored a desire to gloat, I would have gleefully bought a ticket to visit you 18 months ago. I am sitting here because I have one lingering question." She suspiciously raised a single, unkempt eyebrow. Was the fraudulent scheme genuinely all Dad's brilliant idea? Or did you just maliciously throw him under the bus because you were utterly terrified of the handcuffs? For a very long, agonizing minute, she refused to provide an answer. Then, excruciatingly slowly, the impenetrable, arrogant mask finally cracked down the middle. It was a combination of both. Her voice was reduced to a raspy, defeated whisper. He actively encouraged the deception. He literally sat next to me and helped forge the initial financial reports. But I was the one who ultimately made the conscious choice. I physically signed the fraudulent legal documents. I eagerly accepted the stolen venture capital. She stared blankly down at her calloused hands. "I am absolutely not an innocent victim in this, Celeste. I am simply an arrogant person who finally got caught." That is definitively the very first completely honest sentence you have ever spoken to me. She let out a dark, highly bitter laugh that echoed off the cinderblock walls. Being locked inside a federal cage grants you an immense amount of free time to deeply reflect on your life choices. And what exactly do you reflect on? I reflect heavily on exactly how I managed to orchestrate my path into this hellhole. She finally lifted her head and locked her exhausted eyes onto mine. I think about how I squandered my entire existence aggressively performing a fake character and completely failed to ever actually be anything authentic. A single tear slipped out. I think about how you were literally always the only one of us who was actually truly okay. We sat together in the heavy, humming silence of the prison visiting room. We were not perfectly bonded sisters, but perhaps, for the very first time in our lives, we were finally approaching something that vaguely resembled an honest relationship. Summer has officially returned to the Midwest. I am currently sitting peacefully on the restored wooden dock at Lake Geneva, my bare feet casually dangling over the sparkling water that heavily reminds me of how Grandpa Harold's eyes used to excitedly twinkle right before he delivered a terrible punchline. James is currently puttering around inside the cabin, likely brewing that incredibly complex artisanal coffee he is so stubbornly proud of, the specific kind that requires 20 minutes of labor but tastes virtually identical to cheap instant grounds. But I would absolutely never dream of breaking his heart by telling him that. I have spent an immense amount of time sitting on this dock, deeply reflecting on exactly what this catastrophic, years-long ordeal ultimately taught me. First and foremost, your inherent, fundamental worth is absolutely not determined by broken individuals who actively refuse to acknowledge your value. I literally wasted 30 years of my life aggressively performing for an audience whose eyes were permanently glued to someone else. That devastating reality was absolutely not an accurate reflection of my personal lack of value. It was solely a reflection of their chosen blindness. Secondly, enforcing rigid, ironclad boundaries is absolutely not an act of cruelty. It is a vital act of self-preservation. I previously operated under the toxic delusion that unconditional love required you to tolerate endless abuse, to silently absorb every single inflicted hurt, and to constantly play the bigger person, until your own identity was entirely erased. Now, I fully comprehend that authentic, healthy love, especially the love you hold for yourself, absolutely demands strict, unbreakable limits. And finally, sometimes, the absolute greatest, most loving action you can take is to physically step backward and allow the catastrophic consequences of someone else's choices to fully detonate. I did not actively seek malicious revenge against my toxic bloodline. I did not anonymously dial the FBI tip line. I did not brilliantly orchestrate their spectacular downfall. I simply refused to continue participating in their collective delusion. And eventually, objective reality aggressively caught up with them. Grandpa Harold inherently understood this profound truth. That is exactly why he secretly bequeathed me this beautiful lake house. He did not weaponize the property as a tool to punish my father. He gifted it to me to ensure I possessed a solid, unshakable foundation to stand on when the rest of their fraudulent world inevitably washed away into the sea. I do still maintain sporadic contact with my parents. I interact with my mom significantly more frequently than my dad. It is an incredibly fragile, delicate dynamic we are attempting to build. We operate much more like distant acquaintances who unfortunately happen to share a messy history, rather than a mother and daughter bonded by deep affection. But the interactions are finally rooted in objective honesty, which is a massive upgrade from the toxic illusions we were drowning in before. And as for Victoria, she is scheduled to be released from federal custody in exactly 2 more years. I genuinely have absolutely no idea what the architecture of our relationship will look like when she finally walks out those prison gates. Maybe we will build absolutely nothing. Maybe we will forge something entirely new. The beautiful, liberating point is that I absolutely do not need to figure that out today. I no longer require their validation to make my soul feel whole. I already am entirely whole. My specific narrative absolutely does not conclude with a flawless, cinematic fairy tale ending. There is no dramatic, weeping climax where my parents throw themselves to their knees and beg for my total forgiveness while a soaring orchestra plays in the background. There is no magical scene where Victoria and I fall into a sobbing embrace and swear a blood oath to be best friends for eternity. There is no pristine, smiling family portrait where the decades of horrific abuse are magically erased from the hard drive. Actual messy, human reality simply does not operate like a Hollywood script. But here is exactly what I do possess today. I have a thriving, elite career that fills me with immense pride, entirely built upon the exact analytical skills that my family viciously used to mock. I own a stunning, peaceful home completely saturated with the loving memories of the absolute only person who always saw my true reflection clearly. I am deeply loved by a partner who consistently honors his given word, and who genuinely cannot comprehend why I find that basic level of decency so incredibly remarkable. I finally possess total, unbreakable peace. My current emotional boundaries look exactly like this. I love my broken family from a very safe, heavily guarded distance. I show up to assist them when I possess the emotional bandwidth. I offer help exclusively when it does not actively harm my own well-being, and I fiercely, aggressively protect my internal peace above absolutely all other priorities. I do not harbor active hatred for them in my heart. Harboring hatred simply requires way too much caloric energy. But I also no longer play the pathetic game of pretending that securing their approval means absolutely anything to my survival. The arrogant, sycophantic people who maliciously laughed at my expense during that Thanksgiving dinner? They have almost entirely faded into the background static of my life. A handful of them have cowardly reached out over the years to offer highly awkward, backtracking apologies. I politely accept their remorse, and then I immediately decline their dinner invitations. If you are currently watching this video and you see your own painful reflections staring back at you in any chapter of my story, if you are the chronically overlooked sibling, the constantly dismissed expert, the designated family scapegoat, or the exhausted person who has spent decades screaming the objective truth into a suffocating void of intentionally deaf ears, I desperately need you to internalize something right now. You are absolutely not clinically insane. You are absolutely not consumed by toxic jealousy. You are absolutely not being too sensitive. You are simply viewing the world with perfect, 20/20 clarity while standing in a crowded room full of people who have actively chosen to remain blind. And I promise you, eventually, the blazing light of the truth always catches up with them. So, that is my complete story. Thank you so incredibly much for sticking around and listening to all of it. Now, I desperately want to hear yours. Please drop a comment down below. Tell me about a specific moment in your life when you finally decided to stop shrinking yourself down to make others comfortable and actively started standing tall in your own truth. I promise you, I will read every single one of your experiences. If this narrative resonated deeply with your soul, If it made you feel profoundly seen, righteously angry, or incredibly hopeful for your own future, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps the algorithm push these stories to the people who desperately need to hear them more than you can possibly know. And please, make sure to turn on your notification bell so you do not miss the very next upload. There are several more incredible stories exactly like this one linked down in the description box below. Epic stories heavily focused on navigating toxic family dynamics, establishing ironclad boundaries, and finally reclaiming your inherent self-worth. Until next time, please aggressively protect your peace. You have absolutely earned it. I will see you in the next video.